That's fine.
Buy you a little time. Hello, welcome. Great to see everybody. Glad you are all here um, for our final installment of the Let's Dig Deeper uh, session. Really glad to have folks here. We've done a series of calls that's covered a lot of topics in the co-op world for a lot of people across our region. So we're really glad that folks have been able to join us. Um, I just to recap the journey that we've been on together. We've covered a lot of stuff again from a lot of people. And here we are today at the end of the session, where we still haven't corrected the date on the session, but are really excited today to be joined by Jason Flowers to round out our series. A little housekeeping if folks are interested in the certification, the kind of requirements for that would be to complete the survey, give feedback on each of the sessions. So either you've watched them live or you can go ahead and watch the recordings, finish the surveys for each session. And then we're going to invite people to join us for, I think we decided it would be our next KDC board roundtable, where coincidentally, I think we already have Scott talking about ecosystems. So we're going to ask people to join us to kind of talk about how they might expand the cooperative model, apply lessons learned in their own ecosystem. So we're excited for that, which will be in July, right? When do we have those? Anyway, we'll send out the date and a follow up, and we'll put the link in the chat for the survey for today. Let's stop sharing my screen and welcome our speaker for today, Jason, who's going to talk about transitions. Jason Flowers. I'm going to read a bio about you while you're still here.
Okay, yes.
Has a passion. Jason has a passion for helping others and working with business owners to determine and reach their financial goals. He understands the nuances and benefits of running and growing a business through serving as a CEO for a company for 3 years. Jason graduated from SUNY Plattsburgh College, majored in business administration, and built a career that focuses on helping people reach their goals. His personal mission statement is to become the most trusted and successful business broker in the country. And I can say that we at KDC were joined by Jason a few months ago to kind of talk about conversions of businesses and what owners might be, how they might be advised, right, in kind of making an exit strategy, considerations coming up. And it was really valuable, I think, for our team. So excited for Jason to be here to share his expertise with the folks on the call and the folks watching later. So Jason, the floor is yours. Thanks for being here.
All right, thank you for having me, and nice to meet everybody. And I'm going to breeze through this presentation, and it's about exit planning and basically getting getting to the finish line and what does that take, and then if you have any questions in between, you can kind of raise your hand. We have time to pause and answer any, if you want something elaborated on, I can do that as well. So I will share my screen. Screen. Okay. Um, can everybody see my screen?
We can. Yep. We're seeing the presentation now.
Okay. So this group here has been talking about cooperative ownership and what does it take to get there? How do we get there? And what's the true benefits of getting there even before the owner decides hey, I want to sell a business. And so we'll get into that, some components of that. That's why I kind of call this before the exit. Because a lot of times, especially when I speak to owners, they don't even know that they want to sell their company. So I call them up and I said, do you want to sell a company? And they're like, oh, I didn't even know I can sell, right? So as people that support co-ops, we want the owner to even have that as an option, for them to buy the company. So before the companies, where do companies stand in the U.S.? 8,000 large companies, 3,000 mid-size, 8.1 million small businesses from 1 to 100 employees. the the 8.1 small businesses compared to the others is a very significant number, but you see the employee size um, break up here, and which is a wonderful opportunity for co-ops. Of course, there are, some of these larger companies can have co-ops, but this right here is a huge opportunity for co-ops to happen. Um, Small business statistics, small businesses, less than 500 employees, approximately 30 small businesses and 30 million small businesses in the US. Over 22 million are self-employed, and over 50% of the working population works in small businesses. 50% of small business owners have no strategic plan. This is one of the most important like facts page here. That kind of gets me going every morning, and it'll help you understand, why, cooperatives can be a great topic to talk about. So 50% of small business owners have no strategic plan. They don't even know what they're going to do, how they're going to do it the next year. Sometimes they just do the same thing every year because it works, right? So that's kind of what goes on. 40% of business owners plan to invest or acquire another business. 30% of business owners have no estate plan beyond the will. And then 75% of owners do not have an exit or transition plan. 75%, if you just think about it, if you um, conceptualize that 8.1 million number, that's almost 6 million companies. They don't have an exit plan or transition plan. And just imagine if the buck stops where before they even decide to sell, they come up with this plan, and one of the first options is to have the employees be a part of this transition. It talks about the importance of an exit plan, creating a lasting legacy. Now, when I talk to business owners, doesn't matter what size, they can the cost of the business could be $100,000 to $10 million, and they'll tell me, I want to sell, I'm ready to sell, but I want to make sure if somebody buys this company, it's going to operate the same way. It never really kind of changes. That approach doesn't change from seller to seller. They always care about how the business is going to look after it's done. They, they want to know and so when you present two or three buyers in front of them, they'll be like, well, I don't think the employees here are going to like this person. you know it's rare that when somebody sells a company, the only thing they care about is cash. Okay, I want $10 million. All right, you're going to give me $10 million. All right, I'm gone. They truly care about the legacy of how 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 that company is going to look moving forward. How they wouldn't have to worry about that if one of the options um, was a co-op opportunity. But that 75% of business owners that don't have an exit strategy, it's the time now to start talking to business owners because they don't know. I mean, I watched a video of a daycare, you know, providing that cooperative experience and had the employees buy the company, but they didn't know they could sell the company. They were, but they know they were done. And the broker, they had a broker, and the broker was like, "Yeah, your employees can buy it." So they kind of like came together, and then and the employees, they figure out they pay every year, but it's a pretty good incentive of knowing that your company has a lasting legacy because the same people are working it, and they following the same strategic plan. So this talks about some of the exit strategies. Um, but we I kind of dug into that. Design a business to run without you. Keep your finances in order from the beginning. If anybody here is a business owner or wants to help some of their business owner friends to be able to sell their company even to their employees, um, your finances, your what you file to the government is 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 what you are tell you is basically your word. So once you file to the government, let's say your cash flow every year, and the cash flow is how much is money's left over in the bank. And say if your cash flow is $200,000, then the bank is going to trust what you submitted to the government. And usually, the bank looks at the last 3 years of financials. And if you've done good for 1 year and the last 2 years your paperwork wasn't good, prior to that, then either your business is going to be you know have a low number, or a low value, or it probably won't be able to be sold. So people that are buyers out there in the whole ecosystem won't even look at your company, or they'll look at it and they'll definitely bypass it. But if you have a cooperative and some of the resources that are there, like SBA and SSBCI, they're gonna look at your last three financials. So if you're working with business owners and they said that they're ready, and let's get this co-op going, um, those last 3 years needs to show either some growth, or everything has to be in order. If the seller you know, is kind of using the books to, buy their house, or for housing expenses, they have to get that off their books, before, they decide to sell, because like I told you, it lowers the value of the company. So keeping your files in order, and then, decide how much to say. If you're doing a cooperative, then, you talk to your employees about it, but you just make sure you don't tell the whole world that you're selling, because then competitors can go to your customers and say, "Hey, this business is about to close," so they'll start rumors. So 100% of the clients that I have and the clients that Murphy has, I didn't get you to give you an introduction about Murphy, but 100% of our clients, everything's confidential. So when we list a company, we only give a low level information of the company until whoever's a buyer signs the NDA. But if you're trying to do that with employees, you make sure employees sign an NDA, so they will understand that if they do you know get the word out and it goes back to them, there could be some ramifications for that. But um, the most important thing is having an exit strategy. So if you're talking to any owner and they think they want to sell, or they even throw it out there, so you know what, I wonder how much my company costs, right? Or you talking to them and they looking like they kind of run down. Start getting them ready to come up with a true exit strategy. And that exit strategy, like I told you, a co-op could be definitely be an option. And this talks about ways an owner can exit a business, but we hope to, within this discussion, sell them to employees. And ESOP is a more extensive version, but you can create your own co-op to just to buy a business. But as you can see, ESOPs, which stands for Employee Stock Ownership Programs, and you see some of the parameters around that 1 million and 30 employees, right? So it's kind of that's the high end. But for smaller companies, the cooperative can create their own company and end up buying a business that way. The average time to sell a business is 8 to 10 months. If it goes on the market, it stays on for 2 years, but we hope that it doesn't get on the market, right? We're talking about co-ops. 40% of buyers are first-time business owners. If we do a co-op, a lot of these people that are working in the business have never owned a business. So, it's best to educate. If that conversation is starting to happen, it's best to educate the employees on what it takes to run a business, and maybe there could be some training involved if that's part of the exit plan. And this talks about and how long it takes to sell, kind of the average size of business that do sell, and the business that are available for sale, they mainly run by baby boomers. 60% of business owners were born, before 1964. Um, how old are you if you were born in 1964? I don't want to say the age, but people are tired, right? And I've sat down and talked to business owners, and they're tired, they're ready. Or they don't, like I told, they don't know that they want to sell a company because they didn't even know that was an option. They didn't even know that their company was worth a certain amount of number. There are a lot of owners that think that blood, sweat, and tears adds value to a company, but it doesn't, right? So the business, they're telling me, hey, I want $2 million for your business. And I say, hey, your business is only worth $500,000. They'd be like, well, then I don't want to sell it then, right? And I'm like, well, that's all you're gonna get, right? And they'll say, I put 20, 30 years into this business, but once you bring them down to reality and let them know that's the most they can sell it for, um, but the one thing that they always talk about, and it was in the earlier slides, is make sure that company has a lasting legacy, especially if they put 20 to 30 years to this business, or 40 years, and they give it to some young whippersnapper, and they can be like, hey, it may not work, because businesses have failed when it changed hands. But imagine if the same employees decide to buy the company. Uh, Here are the steps to selling a business that employees and all buyers have to kind of think about, right? Planning, when you review the data around buying a company. There's valuations that you have to look at. But the planning, we talked about like when you decide to sell your company, you have all your finances in order. And let's say, you still have like your family car on there, right? You just gotta know those things so you can increase the value of your company. And then, hopefully we pass the search option, and then there's the deal. If the employees form a cooperative, they'll be able to submit a letter of intent, and the letter of intent holds the company for like 3 to 5 months, so nobody else will buy it, and then the closing happens. As you saw, it takes up to like it takes between 3 to 9 months to close the business. It's definitely not like the house buying process, unless there's cash involved. If there's not cash involved, before I go into some financial options, but here's a reason why own and sell, right? Retirement, new challenge, burnout, That's the second reason. Relocating, no time to run a business, other interests, always plan to sell, health, illness, death, divorce, dissolve, partnership. So when I'm calling potential sellers, I always hope to, I always continue communicating with them because I hope to be on their radar because, of these, seven things that reasons of why they would sell, it may come to mind at any point in their life, especially within a year, right? We just don't know. And we want to get to the seller when they're ready to make that decision. But when we approach a seller, we, the ideal situation, and it's only because it brings money, it's there's revenue involved in that. The ideal situation is, hey, yeah, I want to sell. Can you list me right now? But when we're actively talking to business owners, um, we hope that if they say they want to sell a business, right, and we have enough clientele to kind of push this through, we'll say, all right, what you know, what are we going to do for the next 3 years to make sure your business is sellable in the next 3 years? That's making some changes and how you spend your dollars, growing the organization and making sure we can increase the value, and then creating an exit strategy, it takes a couple months, sometimes, maybe 6 months to create an exit strategy. But for that to be implemented, it takes 2 to 3 years. So, um, but a lot of these reasons here, divorce, health, and illness, sometimes they need to sell it right away, right? But when somebody's ready to retire, they have some time. Well, or they may have a dollar amount. I talked to somebody a couple weeks ago, and they said, "Hey, I'm ready to sell." And I asked them, I said, "So what's your number?" They said $6 million. I was like, "Okay, well, um, the business is worth $8 million, and he's been getting offers to, the buyers were trying to offer like $1 million down, and he'll be part owner of this private equity group." And he says, no, he wants the $6 million down. That's the number that he wants. So you know the number that you want, especially when you retire. It helps you plan better when you decide to sell your company. But when you're ready to sell your company, and anybody that you talk to and they say, I want to sell, you can ask them, okay, how have they done for the last 3 years? If there's some growth and it needs to be minor changes, maybe they can sell it right away. But a good exit plan and strategy is at least 3 years. And here are the steps to selling the business, right? The valuation. Um, when a owner sells a company, um, they're 20% more likely to get the price that they want if they have a valuation, right? And then, of course, engage. Then you put a blind profile. Then you'll do a confidential memorandum, and then you find a buyer. Then there's negotiating for the price, letter of intent, due diligence, and then once everything's done with due diligence, and then there's a purchase agreement. A lot of these steps can be skipped or moved right along much faster if you go through the cooperative process because the employees already know the business, right? Due diligence will be so much easier because they already know what's going on with the company. You probably just got to make sure the numbers are okay. So the process will probably be a little bit faster. And so going to like into financing and all of that, what is a cooperative buyout? what does it look like for a business owner, right? And you've been in several of these sessions. The board hires and evaluates the CEO, the workers elect the board of directors, co-op pays members annual profit sharing, and a co-worker cooperative buyout, the co-op obtains credit for the buyout. The co-op offers collateral and repays the loan. The retiring business owners gets cash as the loan is repaid. Um, and I just want to give you like some financing options. The state small business credit initiative, there's funding opportunities for that department. And then um as a lot of companies, especially if a company is less than $5 million in value, SBA loan is the way to go. It becomes a little bit complicated when you have a co-op trying to buy a company because they'll probably most likely use everybody's like credit history and credit worthiness. But um, this is like one of the easiest loans to get because it's being backed by the SBA. The loan is. So most banks, if it's less than $5 million, but it could be a mix. It can be up to $10 million. It could be a mix. If if most banks go towards SBA, right? That's kind of what they want because it's backed by the government. Um, when you try to do a conventional loan, most banks are going to kind of turn it down because it's not guaranteed, it's not backed. So if you do a loan like for if you're buying a company for less than $5 million, SBA loans is the way. But banks, and I tell people, that are new to buying a company, is that, to acquisitions, is there are banks that have separate departments, SBA departments that just focus solely on acquisitions, right? They have departments focused on home buying, but their acquisition department is just as robust as the home buying department. So you can go to a bank and say, I want to buy a business, or my group does. They'll work with you to make sure that happens. A lot of people, including employees and even buyers, right? They're like, well, I don't have any money. So there's so many options where an individual can get funding to buy a business. Um, there are programs where individuals can borrow from their 401k to buy a business, right? And then they can their 401k becomes owners of the business, and then when they sell it, that money goes back to the 401k. So there's so many credit and financing options to buy a business. Um, the people that are taking most of the risk when you're buying a business is the bank, and we just got to make sure that mindset of the buyer kind of understands that. They look at that $2 million number or the $5 million number and not even thinking about the true cash flow number that they could even cover the payments or even pay themselves. That's the last thing they look at. They look at the totality of the number. So there's so many financing options when people decide that they want to buy a business, but your local bank, there are banks that's totally dedicated to um to acquisitions. Huntington is one of them, but there's so many other banks that are out there. I left a acquisition conference 2 weeks ago, and there were about 20 banks there that were sponsors, and they had tables. Like everybody's ready to do a deal. So when you talk to any business owner or you talk to an employee and say, I may want to buy, I want to buy this company from my owner, or if you want to talk to a group, there's several financing options that are covered by the government or banks that are there to kind of make sure the acquisition, um, is successful. Any questions?
Thanks, Jason. Um, I'll lift up just a point I made in the chat. You talked about the SBA loans and the personal guarantees that they require,
Mhm.
and just like lifting that's yeah, yeah. It is a challenge both for SBA loans and I think sometimes other traditional lenders. Um,
Well, if you
that
talk to a bank, like with SBA loans and with acquisitions,
mm,
the personal guarantee is there, but if a buyer doesn't have a house to personal have a personal guarantee, um, then if they don't have collateral, that's okay. You don't need collateral to buy it to buy a business. But if you do have collateral, they're definitely gonna make sure. And then there's also some other loopholes when you're buying.
mhm.
Um, loopholes when you own a house, right? You can kind of the bank will kind of work with you to make sure that your house can be used or not, right? So they kind of they work with you on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think the kind of the co-op specific point
Mm,
that I was working to bring
mm,
up is
mm,
right is that right like any one person putting that
mm,
their own assets or
mm,
using their own credit score or something like that, like
mm.
in co-ops that's a little antithetical, right? Like the
Yeah,
idea is sharing the risk,
yeah.
and also it kind of creates a power differential. So um there's yeah, there's anyway, the point that I brought up in the chat was just that there is a push to kind of shift, um yeah, to change that requirement, at least at the SBA. And there are some lenders that are friendlier to co-ops and like understand that like there's many buyers of this business, rather than just one. And the last session that we did, was the last session that we did? It's the first session that we did. First session we did in Boost Camp, last session we did in Let's Dig Deeper,
Mhm.
covered capitalization. So certainly
And,
relevant, getting people the capital, the financing they need to purchase business.
Yeah, and
and
very often in a transition, um, uh, lenders like to see, and it's kind of a good setup for the selling owner to finance part of it by taking a note. So they might not get the full value right away in cash. They might get some portion from a loan that the co-op takes out to pay for the business, and then they might, it might be an earn out, or it might just be like a um, some kind of a second position loan. That way, the the lenders have more sort of assurance that the selling owner is going to do their best to really make sure that the new owners, the co-op taking over, um, get all the information they need to run the business well, and then, all the connections and everything. Because the owner also has an incentive to keep that business going because that's how they're going to get paid. Um,
so on most deals with acquisition, if it's in real estate, it can be more than 5 million. So most deals are less than 5 million, but if it's real estate, it can be a little bit more. It if they're done by the SBA, the SBA just came out with new standard operating procedures to where um you know if a seller gives 10% does 10% financing, the seller has to hold that note, not collect any interest for the life of the loan. And that's part of the new standard operating procedures of the SBA. So now it's becoming less desirable to do seller financing if it's by a SBA loan. Now, if it's a conventional loan, there's some newer like this there's some like flexibility there. But when it's SBA, any seller financing, if it's the 10%, that 10% that 10% is there for the life of the loan.
Why would they do that?
They make it much harder for acquisitions. It's
That seems counterproductive.
they made a lot of changes.
Mm.
Because in August you were able to buy a company with no money down, right? And basically, as long if the owner gave 10% financing, seller financing, um, and because they were the banks will require 10% equity or down, the 10% seller financing would have counted back then as the equity put down, so you can actually buy a company with no money down. Now they removed that, right? They removed that. Now it's um, you need at least a 10% equity position, but the seller um, can only give 5% down, and that 5% has to be whole for the life of the loan. They can give you 10% seller financing, but it has to be held to the life for the life of the loan. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that makes it less desirable to do seller financing when it's done by the SBA.
Mm. A lot of work to do to get the right capital in place. Um, Another kind of angle that I wanted to make sure that people knew about is that a conversion to a cooperative or a transition to a cooperative doesn't have to be employee ownership.
Mhm.
We're talking with a business owner right now, and he basically aggregates and distributes produce from a whole bunch of farmers
Mhm.
in Northeast Pennsylvania and thereabouts. And, he's looking to retire, and he would love for those farmers to get together as a co-op and take over the business. So that's like, it's basically the sellers to the business
Yes.
taking over the business.
Mhm.
And we're also talking with a little store, a little general store in a rural area. And they're considering like, oh, if the owners of that store want to exit, could the community take it over? Could the
Mhm.
customers take it over?
Mhm.
So you can look at the employees. They might be the right buyers for a business, but it could
Mhm.
also be the vendors and it could also
Yeah.
be the customers.
And
Yeah, I'll add to the list too, just had a meeting this morning with Thrive. So there's like a co-working space for wellness practitioners, therapists in the Erie area. And they've got a membership model. So they've got folks who have a membership to the business, and therefore have a vested interest. And as the owner looks to retire, she's selling it to members that already exist. So rather than just being members with a subscription, they'll be member owners over time. Yeah.
yeah, and so and that's important to know. So one of the main things that I hopped in the presentation is, getting to the owner or the seller, potential seller, and having them come up with a true plan so they'll know what the next step is, and that's the most important thing. Because if I come to you tomorrow and say, you can get $2 million for your business, they'll be like, okay, sign me up, right? But um, if there was a plan, then they would know that an option could be a co-op, right? But it does take patience, and it does take knowledge.
Something else that came up for me during your presentation was like seeing the timeline and the process, right? And recognizing like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's all the work that the seller of the business would have to do.
Mhm.
Because so often we work with the buyers of the business, right?
Mhm.
If it is a conversion to some
Mhm.
sort of cooperative ownership. And so
Yeah.
there's this kind of other parallel process of like getting people ready to own together, to make decisions together, right?
Mhm.
Create bylaws,
Mhm.
establish whatever kind of legal entity they're going to have that's going to
Mhm.
take ownership and control. So there's
Mhm.
this kind of like parallel process that plays out too.
Mhm.
Um, and I wonder, does that happen within 9 months? Like maybe it's, think we could probably get it done in 9 months in the same time, but
You probably
sometimes
get
takes
that.
longer.
You get well, yeah. It could take a little bit longer than 9 months, right? If you
Sometimes.
project manage
Depends
it
on,
pretty
yeah,
well, yes.
depends on the group, maybe.
And I thank everybody for their time and listening. If you have any questions, I think my number's on the slide, but um, they can send it to you by email. But I'm here. I enjoy educating people about transactions and how I'll be able to help. The most important thing is just letting everybody know that there are banks out there. The barrier to entry with regards to acquisition is very low. So if you consider, or if you want to talk to somebody about considering or creating a co-op to make sure that happens, there is there are so many funding resources out there outside of just banks. There are um, private equity firms that probably focus on cooperatives, right? So you just gotta. There's so many funding opportunities to make sure to help everybody reach their goals. So, but I do appreciate everybody, giving me their time, and I'm here to support where I can.
Thank you, Jason.
Mhm.
Other folk, any other questions for Jason? Feel like KDC team monopolized the the question and answer session.
Look like James was about to say something, right?
James is always about to
Yeah,
say something.
yeah, you know me. I just does it get tricky? Like, say the owner wants to sell to the employees, but the owner also wants to be part of the cooperative. Does that
Yeah,
like get
that
tricky with assets and?
no, there's two types of sales. One is an asset sale, and one is a stock sale. So, if the owner was selling you shares or selling a co-op shares, that would be a stock sale. And so they can sell, 10%, 20%, 30% of the business. So if they still want to be a part of it, then they'll just sell the shares, right? But there also could be an opportunity to say, where the seller will be like, "Hey, I want to be a part of the cooperative. Let's create the cooperative, and I'll sell it to the cooperative, and I'll just be a part of the group." So there's that as well.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
Yes.
Yeah, there are lots of examples of that. So, like, for example, Blake Jones started Namaste Solar and then became a worker owner of the Namaste Solar Cooperative. And there's also, uh, what's his name? The South Mountain uh, company, John Abrams. He wrote a whole book, In Good Company. All about how he took his solar installation company and turned it into a worker co-op and then became a worker owner along with his, former employees.
Yeah. And James, like this morning we were on that call with David Litz from Water Bottle, right? And he
Yeah,
talked about like how the plan, and I think that what he kind of talked about is probably the important piece. It was like he went down to like, I don't remember what it was. It was like 80%, 59%, 31%. There was like
yeah,
a
and he's at
gradual
19
transfer.
now. Okay.
Yeah, and now he's at 19%. So now he's part of the co-op, and like all of that, I think is kind of part of some of that planning that has to happen in the beginning of like
Right. But yeah, but I was
what
wondering
percentage,
about
yeah.
like with like I know he said like Seats Commons like was a part of that like buyout or whatever, and I just was wondering like if like how banks might look at that and stuff like that because he was saying like he had some like there like some constraints with that and what Seeds Commons wants
Mhm.
them to do with their business and stuff like that. So like a like I guess with a bank or something, they wouldn't be so much like oversight on the business. You know what I'm saying? So I just
Well,
didn't know how banks thought about that.
I can tell you um, that there's no one size fits all situation for any type of financing for a deal like the one you explained. If you have a specific deal that you want finance, no matter what it is, there's probably going to be a bank that funds it. But if you go to a bank, down the street, and they don't even do co-ops, or they do co-ops, but they have their own restrictions, then you probably can't do it. But I'm pretty sure most of the scenarios that are out there, there's a bank that funds it. So you got to make sure that, you figure out what you want to do, and then you start shopping out your scenario to different banks. Or talk to, there are some national brokers that that where they have relationships with hundreds of banks, and you go to the broker and you say, here's our scenario, and they'll actually find a bank that can fund your scenario.
Yeah. And I did drop in the chat, James, you mentioned Seed Commons. So just in case folks aren't aware, I dropped a link to them in the chat. And they're a little unique, I think, because they do the lending, but then also technical assistance. And it's like part of their model. And so like I think that's why they like are getting a lot of they've got constraints, right? Like there's just like a lot of directive that they're getting because there's this like really interconnected approach to the business and like the technical assistance that they provide. I think like Jason's talking about other banks, like it's just going to be different in different kind of lenders. So some
Yeah,
might just be more hands off and say like, do we want some might like look at the fact that the owner's still there as a positive, like there's some continuity.
Autumn, when you say
Yeah.
you're dropping them into the chat, is that to everyone or somehow?
the link wasn't, I didn't.
Oh, here. Yeah, sorry. I sent two to privately to whoever the other Noemi is, I guess, after I welcomed you into the call. Other Noemi. Yeah, it looks like it's private. Yeah, how do I get back to the main chat? Zoom changed everything.
Yeah, next to the two, you
There we
can
go.
click
Yep.
on it. Yeah, you go.
Yeah, so the survey these are all this is the conversation I've been having with whoever the other Noemi is.
Yeah,
The
what
survey for today's session and also seed comments. Yeah.
one of the other things that just so that you need to know is most of the, when a bank funds a deal, that means it looks good. That means that the company's making money, and there's um, enough cash flow to cover the payments, and enough cash flow, extra cash flow, um, there for the company after your payments, right? Because they don't want anybody to going out of business, and they don't want people or groups buying the business where it's going to put the group or individual into financial dire, right? So that's kind of like they focus on the overall deal, and then they focus on the people. If the deal looks good and it makes a lot of money, they'll focus less on the people. If the deal's making $1 million, and with the cash flows of $1 million and it's $4 million in revenue, that's almost, was it 30% cash flow? And and somebody wants to borrow 4 million because it's such a good deal, um, then a bank's gonna fund that, right? They're gonna find a way to fund that because they know that it's less risk. So less risk, they focus entirely and solely on the deal mostly, and not the people. Any other questions? Right.
I
Jason.
kind of have a question for folks at who maybe interact with businesses. Like, do you hear from business owners, oh, I'd like to sell, or oh, I'd like to retire? Like, does that come up? I'm just curious if that's something that you run across.
I know my colleagues have. I'm fairly new to my position, but I have a client right now who's buying a business that someone else is selling. It's not cooperative, but yeah, so that's my first time going through that. And of course it's priced higher than it's worth. So reviewing financials and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that 25% of businesses close, right?
Yeah.
But the number one reason why businesses don't close is because they're overpriced.
Yeah.
And by close, just to be clear for those watching perhaps later, that means like get to a sale.
It's a sale, yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The terminology can sometimes confuse people
Yeah.
because like, oh, are you shuttering? Are you like closing down?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
yeah.
you're
It
getting
gets
to
to
a completed sale.
it gets to a close. And so there are a lot of brokers that will list a business, and the owner will be like, I told you, the owner will be like, I want 2 million, but it's only worth 500K. A broker would be like, okay, we're gonna list it for 2 million, right? But it's really worth 500K, and it's, some brokers like gather listings just to show that, right? So um when somebody's looking to buy a business, you look at the financials and you come up with your own determination. But a lot of times those listings, those prices are they're overpriced. Yeah. You look perplexed, Naomi.
No, sorry. There's somebody leaving a message on my machine.
Okay. Mhm. But that happens. So I'm glad you guys are looking at the financials, because if you're not working with Murphy, it's gonna be overpriced.
Jason, you said one of the things you said earlier on was that business owners don't even know that it's an option. So how do you think how do you think we can let more people know? What do you think is the most effective way we can share the word?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think just like continued education, having like seminars at chambers, even if they don't do chambers, um, sometimes people get mailings, but they don't even understand what that means. So it's just continuous education to business owners that they could retire, right? You ever sit at a bar and the owner, they can't even get out their seat, right? Because they probably don't even know that they can sell it, right? Or get it for the money that they want it for. But it's just education, continued education. And the business, the exit plan, you saw that 75% of business owners don't have an exit plan. If we can get, 50% of those people to have an exit plan, then, the economy will be a better place, right? Because now people will work to do better in their business, take those 3 years to hash out that exit plan so they can sell it. But nobody really has exit plan. They just go day by day, year by year, doing the same thing over and over. Mhm.
Annie, I saw you come off mute earlier, and I think that I cut you off. And
No,
so
you're
I want to
fine.
give you space.
It's totally fine.
Did you have a question to ask or something to chime in with on that last topic?
No, I hit it accidentally.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Sorry to put you on the spot though.
No
Right.
problem.
Right.
Well, I'm here. And if you guys need anything or have any questions or come across somebody that wants to sell and co-op may not be an option, or if it's a quick dire need for them to sell because they're about to lose their house or going through a divorce or something like that, just have them call me. But I'm here to help. I'm excited about helping people reach their goals. So however we can help them, you can always reach out to me.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you
Thank you,
so
everybody.
much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank you.
thanks for
Okay.
rounding out this series, folks. Please complete the survey. This concludes our Let's Dig Deeper series, and we're really grateful that folks joined us on this learning journey. Thanks for closing us out,
Thank you.
Jason.
All right, bye.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.